The person serving water in front only glanced at the girl's hand and discovered that her finger was broken. He took the ice cream from the boy standing next to him, ate the entire ice cream in 2 bites, then immediately put the ice cream down on the girl's finger. Conveniently, he pulled out the girl's hair tie and immediately made a simple fix splint. He jokingly asked for money for medical treatment, but the girl said that she did not ask him to treat her. He said he had already treated the girl and teased her to pay him quickly. When leaving, Perrin emphasized that she must go to the hospital for a checkup. Then, the girl and her father went to the hospital. The doctor saw the fixed splint on the girl's hand and was extremely surprised. Luckily, the fixed splint was there in time. If it had been any longer, she would have lost her finger. The doctor told the girl to get a CT scan, but right at the turn, she heard a familiar sound. It turned out to be Perrin, who helped her fix her fingers. Just as her father wanted to thank him, he suddenly coughed violently. Perrin discovered the father's abnormality, then placed his hand on this man's chest to perform a diagnosis. This unreasonable action was pushed away by her father. He said there was nothing wrong with him. It was just a common cold. But soon, the girl's father gradually had difficulty breathing. At that time, a serious traffic accident occurred on the highway, and a large number of injured people were taken to the hospital. The little girl saw her father's uncomfortable appearance and was very worried. She wanted to find a doctor to check on her father, but the doctors were all treating the injured people brought by ambulances. No one paid attention to her. The helpless girl could only raise her voice to attract attention, but in less than 2 seconds, the doctor started busy working again. Perrin finished giving the water and saw everything. Right at that moment, a kind doctor ran over to ask, just as he was about to check on her father. The doctor on the side called him for help. He could only ask his colleague to take the father for a CT scan. Perrin didn't feel secure and immediately went along to see what was going on, but while in the elevator, her father suddenly fainted. Perrin and the doctor quickly helped him out of the elevator. The doctor rushed to get aid equipment, and Perrin placed his hand on the girl's father's chest. A 3D image of this man's heart immediately appeared in his mind. He discovered that the girl's father had suffered a cardiac arrest, but the doctor only held one simple oxygen mask, then intubated the patient. But Perrin asked the doctor to check his heart. The doctor did not pay attention to him, only saw him grab the oxygen ventilator, loudly saying the doctor checked his heart. The helpless doctor just started checking. The result was as Perrin said. He quickly asked the doctor to perform cardiovascular resuscitation. The nurse also brought in an electrocardiograph. Perrin prepared to save the patient. With the help of Perrin, the girl's father regained his heartbeat, but surgery was needed immediately. The preparations for the surgery were complete, but at this moment, they couldn't contact the surgeon. Due to a traffic accident, the doctor who performed the surgery was currently performing another surgery. The assistant in the operating room came out and said if they didn't do it quickly, the girl's father could die at any time. Hearing this, the little girl silently shed tears. She knew that only the man in front of her could save her father. She wanted to ask Perrin to do the surgery, but all the surgery hospitals had ruined his career as a doctor. As soon as Perrin turned to leave, the girl pulled him back, then took the only coin from her pocket and put it in Perrin's hand, saying, "Please save my father." This little girl's action touched him. He silently decided that no matter what the consequences, he would try his best to help her. He started preparing for the surgery. When he entered the operating room, everyone else was surprised. Everyone didn't know who it was. Before everyone could react, the surgery began. Unexpectedly, no blood flowed out when he made the incision. This made the surrounding doctors extremely surprised. They didn't expect someone with such skillful abilities, but they did not know that the water carrier had been imprisoned in a secret research institute for the past 5 years. Every day, he performed dozens of surgeries, but his surgery success rate was 100%. When he was proceeding with an important step, the power suddenly went out, which made everyone around him extremely frightened. However, the main doctor is not frightened at all. He relied on his many years of experience to complete the inherently impossible surgery in the dark. In this place, he trained a brave spirit. He treated this patient to help the girl whose name he did not even know because this person was the girl's father. The operation was proceeding in an orderly way, but at this moment, Dr. Swan came again. She was suspicious of the strange main doctor in this surgery. At this time, Dr. Swan was extremely distrustful. She did not think that a person who brought water could complete the operation. She asked to immediately stop the surgery. Perrin said, "If I don't do it, then can you do it?" But Swan was not capable of performing the surgery, having never undergone such a complicated procedure. The assistant next to her also said that this type of complicated surgery could not be done by Swan and told her to rest assured. Even though he was not a doctor, Perrin's skills were very good. Swan was helpless and could only leave. Then, she called many security guards, preparing to take Perrin away after the surgery. The surgery was completed smoothly, and the girl's father had been saved. Swan looked in the direction of the operating room but could not see the water delivery man anywhere. Just as Perrin was about to leave, Swan chased him and stopped him. She slapped Perrin incomprehensibly, and Perrin didn't want to explain much to her. He said that no matter what his status was, as long as he could save the patient, that was enough. Swan was about to hit him, but he caught her hand. However, she used her other hand to hit him. At this moment, the emergency room called. It turned out that the girl's father had complications after the surgery. His blood pressure decreased rapidly, which made the doctor nearby panic, but Perrin had already predicted this. He described the patient's condition in detail and proposed a solution. Dr. Han, who had just performed the surgery, then rushed over. The first aid measures were exactly as Perrin said, which also surprised Swan. However, at this time, Swan had no intention of letting him go. Dr. Han came over and said that even if he had a license to practice, he could not perform surgery in hospitals without being registered. Fortunately, the patient has nothing to worry about, but Perrin must never appear again in the future. Perrin also wanted to quickly leave this place. Then he began to continue delivering water. But at this moment, another doctor wanted to arrest him. The doctor at this remote private clinic was examining an uncle with many tattoos. The surgery was only half done, and the doctor was already asking for medical fees. Hearing that, the junior was upset. Just one look made him want to hit someone, but this doctor was also not average. He pressed his forehand on the wound of the big man, and the big brother screamed in pain. The juniors panicked. Perrin sat down and said the surgery fee was 150,000, and each stitch cost 10,000. Roughly 10 stitches were needed, which was about 100,000. Seeing that the other person was hesitant to make a decision, Perrin pressed on the wound again until he had paid enough money. The surgery ended smoothly. In order to make more money, Perrin opened a private clinic himself. Because he saved the father of a little girl at the hospital, this also made him famous. One day, a doctor came to his clinic, and what this man saw was Perrin's superior medical skills. He wanted to invite Perrin to his hospital to work against Dr. Han, who was also the best doctor at that hospital. However, Perrin was not interested. He thought his clinic made money faster. But as soon as Dr. Moon used the power of money, Perrin immediately agreed because, 2 years ago, several prisoners were sent to the hospital where Perrin was being held. He accidentally discovered that the red string in the other person's hand was a gift he personally gave to his girlfriend Jay when he was young. He quickly chased after him and couldn't believe everything before his eyes. When he pulled down the white cloth, the person lying in front of him was his girlfriend Jay. At this moment, he made up his mind to take his girlfriend away from this place. Under his treatment, Jay quickly woke up. Perrin took advantage of the guards not paying attention and took Jay away. But God did not bless the two of them. They were quickly caught up by the Research Institute's bodyguards. To stop Perrin, the man in black opened fire towards Jay. Just as Jay was about to fall into the lake, Perrin was able to hold her hand. Jay, in order not to involve Perrin, chose to let go. Perrin was then chased by the police, arrested, and deported back to his country. After returning home, Perrin desperately searched for Jay's whereabouts. Finally, he got some news from an uncle. This uncle took him to a mysterious basement, and the person on the screen was his girlfriend Jay, whom he had been looking for so long. The uncle told him that if he wanted to save his girlfriend, he needed a lot of money. That's why Perrin attaches great importance to money. They went to the hospital, but Perrin discussed the conditions with Dr. Moon. At this moment, Perrin seemed to see his girlfriend. He quickly ran after her to see what was going on, but the woman disappeared around a corner. He went to the private detective who was investigating his girlfriend's case and asked him why he lied to him, but the uncle loudly affirmed that he had mistaken the person. It was just that they looked alike. At this time, Perrin also suspected that he was mistaken. But as soon as Perrin left, a strange man came to his uncle, telling him to stop investigating Perrin's girlfriend because he had seen Jay's figure in the hospital. With the introduction of Dr. Moon, Perrin came to this hospital to work. Dr. Moon gave him some insurance money, saying to use it. Then Perrin went to the detective uncle. He wanted this man to continue investigating Jay's whereabouts and even split the money in half. He announced that after finding Jay, he would pay this man the other half. This man was very angry. But on the first day of work, Perrin met Swan. As soon as she met him, she kicked him. But suddenly, an emergency happened in the hospital room. Perrin rushed over, and as soon as he entered, he saw a scene that made everyone who saw it angry. The patient had a cardiac arrest, but the nurse beside him could only stand and watch. The reason was that the patient had signed a commitment to refuse cardiopulmonary resuscitation. However, Perrin did not allow any patient to die in front of him. He tried his best to cure the patient, and under his constant efforts, he was able to save the patient from death. But when doing the examination, he discovered a bracelet on the patient's wrist. At this time, he was unusually agitated. This was clearly the bracelet he had given to his girlfriend. But why did it appear on this patient's wrist now? He seriously thought about the relationship between Jay and this person, then called to ask for information about the patient. After investigating, he found out that this patient was Swan's mother. Perrin looked at the bracelet he gave to Jay, and at this moment, he made a bold decision. He began to analyze the patient's condition and simulate the surgical process in his mind. But no matter how he simulated the surgery, it could not be successful, which also meant that he lost track of his girlfriend's whereabouts. Why did Swan give up saving her mother? It turns out that when she was young, her mother cruelly abandoned her and left her with her father. This made her always hold a grudge in her heart. But as soon as she turned to leave, the mother took her hand with difficulty. At this moment, she was extremely miserable. She looked at the mother she hated to the core and asked the other person why she abandoned her, but the mother quickly fell into a coma. She called her boyfriend, Dr. Han, and wanted to ask him to save her mother. But Dr. Han did not answer the phone because he knew the success rate for the surgery was almost zero. He wanted to protect his success rate, so he refused to do the surgery again. At this time, Swan was very helpless. She thought that the only person who could do surgery on her mother was Perrin. On the other side, Perrin was still simulating the surgery. But just when he wanted to give up, Swan came to him. At this time, Swan was extremely heartbroken. She imitated the other girl and put a coin in Perrin's hand, asking him to help her with the surgery. After learning about her relationship with her mother, Perrin immediately agreed. Perrin's surgery success rate is 100%. If the surgery is not guaranteed to be successful, he won't do it. But this time, he intended to try it, even if there was only a 0.01% probability. The surgery was about to start, but the director above the observatory called, asking to immediately stop the surgery. This made Perrin extremely confused. He looked at Swan next to him, only then realizing that she was the daughter of the president of the hospital. He then started the surgery despite the director's objections. Swan was also very touched by his defiant behavior. Dr. Han heard this news and rushed over, but Swan was filled with disappointment in him. The 7-hour surgery made everyone very tired. Perrin's operations were very careful. But at this time, during the surgery, an incident occurred. Perrin gave emergency medical care to the patient, but no matter how hard he tried, the patient's life was now fading. Swan did not want to accept the fact that her mother had passed away, so she pushed Perrin aside and then started resuscitation by herself. Perrin didn't have the heart to look at her heartbroken appearance, but he was helpless and couldn't do anything. Swan was very heartbroken and unwilling. She still didn't know why her mother abandoned her. She was gone forever. Perrin hugged her tightly and calmed her mood. It was at this moment that Dr. Han, her boyfriend, saw the scene in front of him, which made his heart extremely complicated. Next, Dr. Han began to retaliate against Perrin. The next day, the hospital held a disciplinary meeting for him. Dr. Han questioned Perrin about why he did the surgery. Perrin said he did it for money. This statement made everyone extremely surprised, but they didn't know that Perrin only received 1 coin. He simply wanted to help Swan's mother. Perrin did not want things to become too serious, so he decided to humble himself before Dr. Han and then leave. But Dr. Han still refused to give up. Perrin couldn't help but get angry. Perrin said that he was not worthy of being a doctor. In order to protect his surgical success rate, he did not want to perform surgery on patients. Doctors only do surgeries with a high success rate. If the success rate is low, then do you have to watch them die? These words made Dr. Han unable to say anything. Swan also expressed that she was very disappointed with her boyfriend. She then went to her mother's place, where she met Songi, who bore a striking resemblance to the girlfriend that Perrin had been looking for many years. It turns out Songi is Swan's mother's personal doctor. She gave Swan's mother's belongings to her and explained that her mother had always loved her very much. At that time, her grandmother had abandoned Swan just because she wanted her daughter to follow her father to have a better life. Swan heard this and could no longer control her emotions. The gap between mother and daughter was resolved, but unfortunately, her loving mother had left her forever. On the other side, the detective uncle called Perrin to say he had found his girlfriend's whereabouts. This made him extremely happy. The uncle told Perrin to prepare the money and then meet at the agreed place. When the two of them arrived at the agreed location, Perrin did not know that a man in a black shirt was following behind him. At this time, the man in black raised the gun in his hand. Right when the two were about to meet, a large truck blew out of control and crashed directly into the uncle's car. Perrin couldn't believe what happened before his eyes. He quickly went forward to rescue his uncle and immediately carried him back to his clinic. Dr. Moon also rushed over when he heard the news. Perrin began the surgery, but his clinic had many limitations. Perrin put his hand inside the patient's body, then closed his eyes and felt it. Dr. Moon did not dare to believe what he saw. He did not expect that Perrin's medical skills were so advanced. In such harsh conditions, Perrin could still perform surgery. Under Perrin's first aid, the uncle survived the critical condition. Then, the ambulance came to take the uncle to the hospital, but at this moment, the man in black appeared again. At this time, Perrin did not detect him. As soon as they were about to go to the hospital room, they found they couldn't locate the uncle. He quickly asked the nurse, but the nurse didn't know anything. Her expression was very suspicious. This person's attitude made Perrin extremely confused. But at this moment, the detective uncle sent a text message again, saying he was going abroad to recuperate and told Perrin not to contact him again. Perrin hurriedly called, but the other person didn't answer. The person holding the phone was the man in the black shirt. Perrin lost his clue about his girlfriend again. It seemed like there was a mysterious force preventing him from finding her. Then he looked towards a camera in the hospital. He had seen his girlfriend's figure in this place before. So, just checking the camera could determine if it was the person Perrin was looking for. However, not everyone could check the hospital's security cameras. He just walked in and was kicked out. He went to Swan because he knew she was the president's daughter. Maybe she could take him for a checkup. Then the two of them went to the door of the surveillance room. Swan could really help him see the surveillance camera. After a while of searching, he finally found someone who resembled his girlfriend. But the video was not clear, so it was impossible to identify this woman's face. However, it was possible to determine that this was a doctor at the hospital. Perrin took Swan to his clinic. He wanted to show her his girlfriend Jay because Swan knew all the doctors in the hospital. But when she saw Swan's photo, she was extremely surprised because the person in the photo was her mother's personal doctor. Perrin quickly asked her again, and Swan gave him a certain answer. Then they both drove to the hospital but couldn't find Jay there. The two of them had to ask for the other person's phone number to contact her. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind. It was the person they were looking for. Perrin excitedly looked at the woman in front of him, but the other person said she didn't know him. Perrin took out the bracelet he gave her when she was young, hoping she could remember it. But Swan, in front of him, was extremely angry because it was a lucky gift she had given to Swan's mother. She asked why it appeared in Perrin's hand. After saying that, she wanted to take it back, but was not careful and grabbed the bracelet, causing it to break. Faced with Perrin's question, she became extremely angry and then turned around and left. Perrin didn't accept this, so he hurriedly chased after her. At this time, Songi was treating a patient. Faced with Perrin, who had lost his reason, she became extremely angry and then pushed the patient away. Seeing Perrin heartbroken, Swan had no choice but to drag him away. The two went to a barbecue restaurant. Perrin was in a bad mood and borrowed wine to soothe his sadness. Swan asked him if he knew his girlfriend's parents because Swan had seen a family photo of 3 people on the website. Looking at the photo on his phone, Perrin remembered that his girlfriend's biological father was really different from the person in the photo. Could it be that there are people in this world who are so similar? Right now, he's not sure if Swan is his girlfriend or not, but he doesn't want to lose his girlfriend's whereabouts again. Looking at a man who has been so resolute and defiant like that, Swan really admired Jay. She couldn't help but touch Perrin's face. This scene was often seen by Dr. Han. He picked up the phone to call Swan, but he did not expect that Swan would lie, saying she was at home. Perrin, who was drunk, considered Swan to be Jay. Perrin slowly held her hand, and this time, she didn't refuse. Swan, who had a boyfriend, was out drinking with her male colleagues. She didn't expect that this scene would be discovered by her boyfriend. But her boyfriend, Dr. Han, was not angry at all because she is the daughter of the director. Dr. Han needed her to carry out his plan. Swan originally called Perrin hoping that he would apologize for his actions just now, but didn't expect Perrin to get drunk. The two of them could only take Perrin to Swan's mother's house, but as a result, they slipped. This unexpected accident made Swan very embarrassed, and Songi also felt complicated in her heart. Songi said it seemed like their relationship was very good. Then Swan immediately told Songi about Perrin looking for his girlfriend. The next day, Dr. Han went to Perrin to warn him to stay away from his girlfriend, but Perrin didn't pay any attention and even teased Swan. This statement completely angered Dr. Han. He didn't allow anyone to say bad things about his girlfriend. But this scene was seen by Swan passing by. Dr. Han could only let go. Swan's appearance made Perrin unable to live a normal life. He always thought the other person was his girlfriend. Dr. Moon quickly comforted him and asked if there was any way to identify her as Jay, such as a scar or birthmark. Dr. Moon's words suddenly awakened Perrin. He remembered that his girlfriend had previously had a kidney transplant to help Perrin. Dr. Moon, relying on his relationship, wanted to see Swan's medical records. But the hospital has strict regulations. Viewing other people's medical records will be punished by law. Perrin didn't care that much. He directly grabbed the documents and went back to his room to check. Dr. Moon quickly stopped him, saying doing so would cause him to lose his medical license. Perrin didn't care and immediately pushed Dr. Moon away. He stared at the screen in front of him, looking at the remaining kidney intact on the screen. Perrin sat down on the chair even though he didn't want to believe what was before his eyes. The truth was clear. Perrin stood from afar, looking at Songi. This person looked like his girlfriend. He couldn't believe that there are 2 people in this world who are so similar. Perrin recalled every moment between him and Jay. He thought that no matter how disguised a person was, their heartbeat couldn't be deceived. After saying that, he immediately went up and hugged Songi. Songi did not refuse. Perhaps, after hearing his story, she also sympathized with him a bit. On the other hand, Dr. Han felt that Perrin was being excessive, but Perrin insisted that there was only one person in the world with the same heartbeat as his. That was his destiny. After saying that, he immediately hugged Swan, which made Swan angrily curse him as a bastard before leaving. At this time in the hospital, there was a pregnant woman who was constantly excreting blood and oxygen from her body. If not resolved quickly, the fetus in her womb would be in danger. But the doctor in front of her didn't know what to do, so he could only call the dean of the department, who was in the operating room, for advice. Meanwhile, Perrin placed his hand on the patient's stomach. The other person's physical condition immediately appeared in his mind. The preliminary diagnosis was a lung laceration, as an emergency CT scan could delay treatment. Perrin requested immediate surgery for the patient. Swan was an anesthesiologist and Swan, as a surgical assistant, worked with Perrin. Under their coordination, the surgery went very smoothly, which surprised everyone. They thought that Perrin and his small team would definitely surpass Dr. Han's team in the near future. However, the patient's blood pressure suddenly dropped rapidly. Perrin suspected it was Songyi's mistake. The two began to reason about their specialties, but fortunately, it was all for the sake of saving the patient. With tireless efforts, the surgery ended smoothly. With the baby's cry, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Their excellent treatment also received recognition from everyone. On the other side, Dr. Moon went to Perrin. He thought that the medical records could be falsified and suggested doing a new test. This decision made Songyi very helpless, but she could not violate the hospital rules and had to undergo a new test. After that, Dr. Moon got the disc of the test documents and opened it to see Songyi's true identity. Swan, on the other side, was very stressed. She called a man who was the man in black who had prevented Perrin from investigating his girlfriend. The two seemed to have some plot. While calling, Dr. Moon suddenly appeared. Mr. Call and Songyi then went to his office and said they wanted to check Songyi's health record disc. This made Swan extremely scared, and she immediately grabbed the disc. But Perrin suddenly stopped her. Seeing Perrin's steady eyes, Songyi seemed to feel that Perrin knew something. He inserted the disc into the computer. The newly appointed former Director Choi of the hospital went to ask Dr. Moon to hand over the plate. Just as Dr. Moon was hesitating, Perrin directly opened the medical examination notes. At this time, Songyi was extremely stressed, but what was shown on the screen was surprising: 2 complete kidneys. Through the look just now, Perrin had identified Songyi as his girlfriend Jae. The girlfriend who does not admit her identity definitely has her own suffering. While Dr. Moon chose to apologize to Songyi, Swan also didn't want to make a big deal out of this, so she immediately turned around and left. In the evening, Perrin returned home and saw that the disc had been replaced in his hand. He had actually secretly swapped it because he was going to hide the truth from his girlfriend. At this time, Director Choi came to find Perrin to tell him a secret. Actually, when he was very young, there was a medical accident in the hospital. Park's parents wanted a surgeon to be responsible, but he did not know that the doctor in charge was the man in front of him. At that time, the hospital was in a prosperous period, and Director Choi did not allow any medical incident cases. To stop everything, senior government counselor Yen came up with a good idea. Because the North Korean leader needed heart bypass surgery, they asked this side to send a competent doctor to treat him in order to avoid a war. The higher-ups also agreed. If Park's father was sent to North Korea, he could no longer sue the hospital, and a war could be avoided. Because his parents divorced, Perrin could only follow his father abroad. After the successful surgery, his father was brutally murdered. Perrin was detained in a surgical research institute day and night. After knowing the truth, Perrin was extremely depressed. Afterwards, Director Choi handed over the father's property to Perrin. Looking at the glasses his father used to wear, Perrin silently shed tears. After calming down, he went to Director Choi to give him the medical report. Then he asked the patient's family about the situation. It turned out that after the patient died, his wife was extremely depressed and soon followed him, leaving behind only a boy. The boy was adopted in the United States, and since then, no more information has been available. Director Choi wanted to go to North Korea to find Perrin's girlfriend, but Perrin told him to focus his energy on the medical incident and find the other orphan to apologize to him. That orphan was having dinner with Abbott. Oh, that's Dr. Han. Director Choi told the two of them to get married quickly, but Swan said she wasn't mentally prepared and had something to do, so she should leave first. In the elevator, she remembered Perrin. Maybe at this time, she fell in love with Perrin. After returning, Dr. Han looked at the results and told his parents to be patient and wait a little longer. That day, a pregnant woman came to the hospital. She wanted to kill her newborn because her twins had birth defects, and the medical costs were too high for her to pay. No matter how much the doctor tried to stop her, she still refused to put down the knife in her hand. After learning about the incident, Perrin was very panicked. He rushed to check on the baby. After looking at the screen, he became very nervous and said that he had to perform surgery on the baby immediately. Suddenly, a man stood up to stop them. It was the Abbott's son. He said this patient owed hundreds of thousands in medical fees and was planning to kick her out of the hospital. Perrin couldn't bear to see the patient cornered. Right when the two were arguing, one of the two children had a cardiac arrest. Perrin quickly ran over and asked Swan to stop her brother. They were half-sisters. Seeing this, Swan did not hesitate at all. Perrin hugged the child, knelt on the hospital bed, continued to give artificial respiration, and then gently pressed the child's chest with his finger. He continued respiration and chest compression, repeating many times. Finally, he successfully revived the child's heart. At this moment, he was extremely happy because he had successfully saved a child under his care. Looking at this immature life, everyone had mixed emotions in their hearts. Looking at the poor mother and child, Perrin silently decided to save their lives. At this moment, he thought of a way. Because the hospital had just held a meeting to select 2 medical teams to perform heart surgery for high-ranking officials. One team was led by Dr. Han, and the other team was assigned to Perrin. Even though everyone doubted his ability, Director Choi still thought that his skills were excellent. Hearing the news, Perrin was extremely angry because this high-ranking official was Yang Suk-woo, the person who indirectly caused his father's death. He went to Dr. Han to directly take off his blouse to signify his challenge. He told Dr. Han's team to operate on Yang Suk-woo, but at this moment, he changed his mind. Perrin rushed into the director's room, interrupting everyone's surgical discussion. He looked at Yang Suk-woo and then picked up his white blouse, saying, "I can participate in this surgery competition, but I have a condition. All competition surgery costs will be borne by the hospital. As a participant in this match, I want to exchange it for hospital funds to cover the twins with congenital heart defects, so Perrin can help the patients without having to pay hospital fees." Perrin looked at the enemy who harmed his father in front of him, as if he had his own plan. Then he angrily went to find Yang Suk-woo. "Do you know that suddenly I really wanted to win this contest? Now I really want to know what your heart is like. I'm also very curious about how you'll treat it. Pray that I don't operate on you, because if I open your chest and touch your heart, you will die." This man in front of him was in charge of recruiting children in America. He received a mandate from former Director Choi to search for the remaining child after the medical incident 20 years ago. The two of them were very close friends, and even the other's revenge plans were well known. Sun Chong did not tell Dr. Han's true identity to Director Choi. On the other side, Perrin was even more certain that Song-gi was his girlfriend, Jae, because Yang Suk-woo once told Perrin that if he couldn't cure his heart, he would never see his beloved girlfriend again. Perrin understood that Jae had her own suffering. He just didn't know the real cause. It turns out that Jae, after falling into the lake, was saved by a man in black. Jae was forced to join their organization, secretly carrying out missions for Yang Suk-woo. The appearance of Song-gi just interrupted their conversation. This scene was also seen by the man in black, who then went to Song-gi and asked her to join Perrin's team and help him get the opportunity to operate on Yang Suk-woo. Dr. Han and Perrin split up to hold a meeting about the surgery. Dr. Han's team members said that Swan was not qualified and that they were afraid she would affect the surgery's critical part. They kept questioning her. Swan helplessly went to Perrin and asked about the important part of the surgery, but Perrin directly grabbed her hand and began to teach her how to operate. This scene was seen by Song-gi, who had just arrived. At this time, Swan's heart was extremely complicated, and Dr. Han suddenly appeared, also extremely angry. This scene made Swan and Perrin extremely shy. Dr. Han then called Swan away, but Swan was very tense. "Could you have forgotten that Swan was your opponent's first surgical assistant? You're facing Dr. Han." But Perrin didn't care at all. In his heart, he just wanted to save the baby. Winning or losing in the match didn't matter to him. Perrin was very disappointed with Song-gi, who was in front of him. He couldn't believe that in the other person's eyes, there was only winning and losing without any concern for the success of the surgery. But Song-gi also had her own suffering. She couldn't tell Perrin everything. On the other side, Dr. Han felt that Swan asking his opponent about surgery made him lose face, so he kicked her out of his team. This made Swan very sad. She felt like she had studied a lot for this surgery, but didn't expect this result. Swan learned that Perrin came to find her. Under Park Kwon's persuasion, Swan agreed to help him complete the surgery. Meanwhile, Songi and the man in black went to the secret base, where Yang Suka's subordinates were waiting. The squad leader said that the surgical squad had decided that Dr. Han's team would handle Yang Suka's surgery. Songi and the man in black were no longer valued and were immediately threatened with elimination. The squad leader was counterattacked, and the appearance of Yang Suka broke the deadlock. To determine whether Songi was Park Kwon's girlfriend, they wanted to check her body. After confirming that she was Jae, Yang Suka decided to temporarily keep them alive and asked Perrin's team to win the surgery so they could have the opportunity to operate on him. Swan was about to leave when the man in black stopped her. On the other side, the surgery had begun. Swan, who was supposed to administer anesthesia, and Perrin's team did not arrive on time, and Dr. Han's team had already started surgery, which made Dr. Moon extremely worried. This might be related to the patient's condition. Meanwhile, Perrin didn't know what was going on and wasn't worried at all. But he was still steadfast, saying that Songi would definitely come. At this moment, the door to the operating room slowly opened, and the person who came in was the anesthesiologist Songi. Luckily, she hadn't lost much time. Songi began to anesthetize the baby. The surgery officially began, and the doctors in the observation room were extremely tense because this was not just a match. It was also related to the lives of the two children. After that, the surgery proceeded in an orderly and stable manner. Dr. Han's speed was clearly faster than Perrin's. The two teams raced against time to perform the surgery. But at this moment, Swan suddenly lost concentration, causing the patient's blood vessels to be damaged. Swan was so frightened that the surgical tools fell to the ground. Watching time pass by every minute, she didn't believe she could handle it well. Songi was very stressed because this matter was related to her and Perrin's lives. But Perrin didn't know what was going on and was still steadfast, telling Swan to handle it herself. Swan remembered the techniques Perrin had taught her. She tried to overcome the tension inside, and Dr. Han on the other side completed the surgery at the exact moment. Songi saw the man in black in the observation room. She didn't want to put Perrin in danger. Perrin frantically advised Swan, and she finally cheered up. With everyone's cooperation, the surgery returned to the right trajectory. On the other side, Dr. Han completed the surgery first. As time passed, every second and every minute, Perrin's team's surgery was also completed smoothly. But it was clear that Perrin had more time than Dr. Han. For Perrin, as long as he could save the patient, it didn't matter how fast or slow it was. But he didn't know that this contest was related to his life and death with Songi. The man in black was approaching Perrin right at a dangerous moment. Songi pushed Perrin away, and when the two of them looked at each other, all the previous misunderstandings were resolved little by little. Songi no longer avoided her identity. She was Park Kwon's girlfriend, Jae. At this moment, the hospital alarm issued a green warning. Everyone rushed to the ITC room. The man in black could only leave in defeat. It turned out that Dr. Han's surgery had problems. Dr. Han couldn't believe it and then asked his assistant what the cause was. This result made Dr. Moon extremely surprised. The opponent's failure also meant success for Perrin. Then Perrin and Jae came over. Perrin was only worried about the baby's safety and wanted to personally operate on the baby, but he was stopped by Dr. Han. Dr. Han then began to perform the second surgery on the baby. At this time, he was extremely angry because the success of the surgery was related to whether he could inherit the hospital or not. Director Oh, in the audience, was extremely disappointed in him and then turned and left. Jae went to the man in black and told him that his haste almost killed her and caused Perrin to almost die. But in the eyes of the man in black, Jae was just a puppet. Her and Perrin's lives were in his hands. He told them to give up the idea of running away. On the other side, Perrin wanted to tell Jae the good news, but was unable to contact her. Finally, at a corner, he saw Jae and quickly followed, but he soon lost sight of her. Perrin saw Jae's car at the hospital gate and immediately followed it. Eventually, they arrived at his residence. As soon as Perrin turned around, he saw a smile that was both strange and familiar. He remembered the images between him and Jae and couldn't believe that this day had actually come. Even though he had gone through many difficulties to find a girlfriend, at this moment, Perrin thought that all the efforts were worth it. The two of them were far apart for years, but now they were embracing each other, not letting go. They watched the person they loved, gently caressing each other's cheeks. At this moment, the two of them could no longer contain their emotions. In the following days, the two of them lived a happy life. Because they wanted to be together forever, Perrin took Jay away from this place. He bribed an uncle who promised to quietly take them away. But Jay was extremely worried. As expected, a group of strange men pressed the uncle to the ground. Perrin took Jay and prepared to run away, but they were quickly surrounded, and the leader was the man in black. Perrin was arrested and was extremely worried about his girlfriend. Jay was taken away by two men. Seeing his girlfriend being taken, Perrin begged miserably, but the man in black had no intention of letting them go. He began to insult Jay in front of Perrin, and Perrin, witnessing this scene, was extremely depressed. The man in black saw that he had achieved his goal and immediately arranged for someone to take Jay away. Then he warned Perrin he must perform surgery on Yang-Suku and not let anyone know Jay's identity. The man in black injected medicine into Perrin's body, and he soon fainted. But Perrin did not know that this was just a play orchestrated by the man in black and Jay, because the two of them were inherently part of the same organization. Jay looked at poor Perrin with reluctance, but had a duty on her shoulders. She and the man in black left. Not long after, Perrin woke up in another car. He was very worried about his girlfriend's safety and risked his life to search for Jay's whereabouts. Suddenly, Swan called and said Jay was next to her. After Perrin arrived, he directly pulled Jay away, making everyone extremely confused. At this time, Perrin still refused to give up. He did not want to be under the control of the man in black. He wanted to continue taking Jay away, but Jay knew clearly the power of the organization. No matter where they ran, they would be found. Even the Prime Minister was one of their people. At this time, Perrin also made up his mind to perform surgery on Yang-Suku. Dr. Han, on the other side, wanted to save his team from defeat. He begged the head of the hospital, Director O, to give him another chance, but Director O was not at all soft-hearted about failure. Not only did he refuse to give him a chance, but he also wanted to appoint him to a faraway academy because of his revenge plan. Dr. Han directly knelt on the ground, begging Director O for another chance. Director O remembered that when he was a child, it was this person who had killed his father. As long as he could take revenge, even if he had to kneel in front of the enemy, he would accept it. Looking at Dr. Han always kneeling outside the door, Director O came out again. He remembered that everything he had said to Director O when he was young was completely different from what he said now. But he knew this was his only chance. On the other side, Perrin, because of an uncle who had no money for medical treatment, intended to confront Dr. Han again. However, Director O showed a strange smile. It was just now that he had promised Perrin's assistant a high position, telling him to make the surgery fail no matter what. This could save a large amount of money and make the doctor sick. Dr. Han won, but when the surgery began, Han told Perrin that the patient had a blood clotting disorder, also known as low platelets, in which case surgery was not possible using anticoagulants. Han's goal was to prevent Perrin from continuing with the surgery. But Perrin didn't care about that at all. He still wanted to try a little in order to save the patient. He thought of a method that had been lost for a long time, reconstructing the left ventricle. As soon as he said this, everyone was extremely surprised because the success rate of the surgery was very low. People had only heard about it but had never actually seen it, let alone performed it. The surgery was to be completed as follows. For example, this orange represents the patient's heart. The surface of the heart is cut, then the dead tissue inside is removed, and finally, it is sewn back together. It sounds very simple, but the success rate is very low, especially with a large area of necrotic tissue. This duel attracted the attention of everyone in the hospital. Everyone wanted to witness a surgery with such low success rates. Perrin began to open the patient's chest, but at this moment, the cog of the sternum calcification broke, injuring Perrin's right hand. The unexpected situation made everyone very worried. Perrin quickly changed to another pair of gloves and continued the thoracic surgery, but blood had completely soaked the gloves. He clearly could not complete the surgery. At this time, helpless, He could only ask to change positions with his surgical assistant. But the head nurse on the side stopped them. Everyone was very confused, but she remained determined to chase the surgical assistant away because broken saw teeth were not normal and were checked by medical staff. Perrin's surgeon was the one who installed the saw blade, so she suspected he was playing tricks and chased him away. The head nurse treated Perrin's wound. With the main doctor injured in his hand and no surgical assistant, the surgery could not continue. In his helplessness, he could only borrow someone from the neighboring operating room. But Dr. Han, being an opponent, did not want to help and lent him only an intern doctor. Perrin had no choice but to agree, but Swan was extremely angry. She did not think an intern could take on the important task, so she actively asked to help them. Dr. Han asked in return, "Do you want to go to the opposite side just for this reason?" In fact, Dr. Han had known for a long time that Swan liked Perrin, so he did not agree to this request. But Swan was still worried about Perrin. She ignored Dr. Han's objections and performed the surgery, taking on the position of assistant surgeon. When the two people changed positions, the surgery continued. Perrin only used one hand to perform the surgery, and moreover, he was not a surgeon with a dominant hand. Everyone was worried, but on Dr. Han's side, the process was clearly much faster, and they soon entered the suturing stage, along with the electrocardiogram being awakened, which also meant Dr. Han successfully completed the surgery. On the other side, Perrin also reached the final stage with electric shock to the patient's heart, but the heart still could not beat again. This scene made everyone very nervous. Under Perrin's tireless efforts, the patient's heart finally began to beat. At this time, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Perrin completed the originally impossible surgery with just one arm. He was very happy and hugged each member of his team. When it was Suin's turn, she hugged Perrin tightly, and there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. Perrin looked shyly at Jay, then announced the good news to the patient's family. Director Oh found out that the surgery had been successful and was extremely angry. He had to think of a way to make Perrin lose. He arranged for his son to go to the patient's family and tell them that Perrin was North Korean and had never attended a specialized school. When the patient's family heard this, they were very stressed. They went to Perrin and scolded him, but it still took some time for the patient to wake up. The patient could only be woken up through instruments. Dr. Han was very confident in his surgery. When the heart rate on the monitor showed a gradual increase and the patient also regained consciousness, the hospital held a disciplinary meeting for Perrin. During the meeting, Dr. Han always pressured the opponent because he had long recognized that Perrin's father was his enemy. His questions made Perrin very uncomfortable. After the meeting, Perrin went to Dr. Han and asked why he was targeting him like that. Dr. Han told Perrin about the medical incident. No matter how Perrin explained it, Han refused to believe his words. At this time, the monitoring room bell rang. Park's patient had a cardiac arrest. Under Suin's emergency care, the patient regained his heartbeat, which also made everyone breathe a sigh of relief. It turned out that Suin had voluntarily called the patient up early. The patient's family did not listen to his explanation at all. Perrin was very angry at Suin's behavior. He pulled Suin aside and asked her why she did that. Suin said that if she couldn't wake the patient up, she would be kicked out of the hospital. Perrin asked, "So, what does that have to do with you?" Suin confessed that she liked him. Suin's confession was unintentionally rejected at this moment, and she felt extremely miserable. Jay heard the news and came to comfort Suin. Jay did not know how to comfort her because she was Perrin's girlfriend, and their relationship was not public. She could only use a hug to express her apology. Then Suin wanted to find Perrin to talk clearly. She went to his residence, but discovered 2 pairs of shoes on the ground. Out of curiosity, she looked at Perrin's computer. The wallpaper on the screen was a photo of Perrin and Jay. She couldn't believe it. She then found a CD in the drawer, which was Jay's medical examination records. When she saw the results, she realized that her best friend was the girlfriend that Perrin had been looking for a long time. At this moment, she was extremely depressed. Just then, she saw Perrin and Jay holding hands, which was an extremely embarrassing scene for her. She remembered that Jay had just been comforting her and now was with the person she liked. Suin felt like a clown. She tried to adjust her emotions and immediately left. Perrin stopped her, but no matter how Perrin explained, Suin refused to understand and turned around to leave. The next day, two thugs came to the hospital with an indifferent attitude. Both were upset and wanted the doctor to quickly treat their wounds. Suin couldn't watch anymore and quickly stepped forward to stop them. She did not expect the other person to hit someone and even slap Suin. Suin didn't back down and slapped him back. When the gangster wanted to fight her, Perrin promptly appeared. It turned out that the person who came was the junior of a tycoon that Perrin had previously saved. Under the conciliation of his junior, the situation ended. Suin did not dare to believe that Perrin still had this ability. Suin then applied ice to help Perrin but still felt unable to control her emotions. Jay looked at everything in front of her for a long time and could not let go. She remembered the time with Perrin and how Suin had worked hard for him. She also began to doubt whether Suin was more compatible with Perrin than she was. She looked at the photos on her phone and deleted all of Perrin's photos. At this point, she made a bold decision. She intended to give Perrin to Suin. The hospital held a board meeting to announce Dr. Han as the next director of the hospital because he won and earned the opportunity to operate on Prime Minister Yang Suk-woo. Even though Park's patient regained consciousness, it took longer than Dr. Han's patient. That's why Director Oh assigned the position of director to Dr. Han. Director Oh's son gave him important documents and told him to hand them over to the hospital's lawyer. Out of curiosity, he opened the document and discovered that the hospital's funds were being used illegally. He then went to Director Oh's house for dinner. When he learned that his son had handed over the documents to Dr. Han, he was extremely angry. At this time, he still did not completely trust Dr. Han. After eating, the three of them drank tea. Director Oh asked Suin and Dr. Han to quickly get married, but the two clearly had their own ways of thinking. Dr. Han knew his girlfriend liked someone else, but because he really liked Suin, he said he wouldn't force her. At this moment, he also understood the reason why Park's father missed the medical incident. Because of his revenge plan, he did not want to hurt the person he loved. But the first step of Dr. Han's revenge was the son of Director Oh. While holding a celebration party, the police arrived. Director Oh's son was arrested for corruption and accepting bribes. At this time, Perrin seemed to understand something. Knowing that he was the abandoned child after the medical incident, he asked Dr. Han if he wanted revenge. Dr. Han said maybe this wasn't the right thing to do. Then he went to Director Oh and hinted at his opinion about the medical accident. Director Oh did not realize his mistake, and Dr. Han just wanted to hear a sincere regret. But Director Oh was full of contempt. Dr. Han was helpless and could only reveal his identity. He said he was an orphan. That year, Principal Oh was so angry that he lost consciousness and fell to the ground. But Dr. Han was not moved at all. His purpose in coming here was revenge. Then everyone rushed over. Suin saw her father lying on the ground and was extremely worried. She arranged for the staff to prepare for surgery. She didn't dare to believe the boyfriend in front of her. She asked him what he had done, but Dr. Han did not answer. The medical staff took Director Oh away. At this time, Suin was extremely angry and resentful. She said, "I will never forgive you," then turned and left. When everyone left, Dr. Han sat down on the sofa. He considered his revenge successful, but in his heart, he couldn't cheer up. Under the rescue of Perrin, Director Oh survived the danger. Suin was very grateful to Perrin. She then went to Dr. Han and asked him why he was so cruel. Dr. Han didn't want to explain too much. He packed his things and prepared to leave. Before leaving, he looked at this place filled with memories. Suin's image kept appearing in his mind. He went to Director Oh's hospital room and looked at the enemy he hated to the core. He had many mixed emotions in his heart. Suin asked why he came here. Dr. Han said he had to go. Suin told him to go quickly and never appear at the hospital again or near it. Looking at the girl he loved so deeply in front of him, Dr. Han's heart was extremely painful. Dr. Han came to say goodbye to Perrin. This time, Dr. Han came to entrust Suin to Perrin. He thinks that Perrin and Suin are really meant for each other. On the other side, Director Oh woke up and asked Suin to find Dr. Han. Suin did not understand her father's actions, but Director O said that Dr. Han saved him. It turned out that after Director O fainted, Dr. Han gave him cardiopulmonary resuscitation and saved his life. Suin realized that she had misunderstood him, but no matter how she tried to contact Dr. Han, he did not answer her calls. When Suin ran out of the hospital, Dr. Han had already driven away. Because the dean was recuperating, Suin took over as president. Jae racked her brain to think of ways to annoy Perrin as much as possible. She was angry with him because he left her and went to Suin. But Perrin said he only liked her and would not leave her. At this time, they both hugged each other and cried. The two people who loved each other decided not to separate. On the other side, Prime Minister Yang Suk's surgery also began. Because of Dr. Han's departure, the surgery could only be taken over by Perrin. Before the surgery, Yang Suk found Jae. They were planning a big conspiracy, and since Jae couldn't bear to deceive Perrin again, she decided to reveal all the secrets. It turned out that Jae was a North Korean spy. The surgery for Yang Suk was just a cover. The person who really needed surgery was President Yang Suk. His plan was to have the president in a coma forever, thereby holding power in his hands. His plan also received support from the North Korean government. To prevent this plot, Perrin intended to inform the director, but unfortunately, their identities could not meet. The next day, the president received an invitation to visit the hospital. Under Suin's guidance, they visited many different facilities of the hospital. In a meeting room, Perrin suddenly appeared. His appearance made the bodyguards very nervous, but Perrin wanted to talk privately with the president. For safety reasons, the president's bodyguards insisted on staying. Just when Perrin was about to reveal the entire plan, Yang Suk immediately appeared to interrupt him. When the two people shook hands, he discovered that the president's health was very poor. Perrin placed his hand on the president's chest, and in his mind, he immediately got a three-dimensional view of this person's heart. At this moment, he judged that the president's life was not long, but his actions were stopped by bodyguards. Perrin quickly apologized, and then everyone left. Yang Suk returned to the hospital room and received a phone call from the president. The president refused to have surgery at this hospital. This result surprised him. If the president did not have surgery here, all his plans would fail. But his assistant told him that the president's heart could only last another week and that without surgery, he would not live much longer. The current method to cure his disease was to regenerate his heart's left ventricle. The success rate of the surgery was very low, and no one dared to do it. But Perrin completed it with just one hand. Yang Suk was very worried and continued to think of ways to convince the president. The president came to the hospital for surgery, and at this moment, he called again and said that the surgery had to be performed by Perrin's team. This made Yang Suk breathe a sigh of relief. Then the president arrived at the hospital. Perrin patiently explained his condition but was interrupted because the doctor had already explained these situations many times. The president wanted to know the success rate of the surgery and asked how much it was. Perrin did not dare to admit that it was 100%. They then went to Yang Suk and told him to schedule the surgery for the next day. But at this time, the president suddenly fell ill. Perrin immediately began to arrange surgery with the help of everyone. The president was taken into the operating room, and the surgery began. On the other side, Yang Suk began his own meeting. According to the national constitution, if the president falls into a coma, the prime minister will have full authority to replace the president. The surgery was completed smoothly, but the president had not regained consciousness. At this time, Yang Suk was extremely excited and stood up. On the other side, Yang Suk laughed at the president, saying that the president should have dealt with him long ago to avoid this situation. But at this moment, the president suddenly opened his eyes. Only then could he know Yang Suk's plan. Perrin and Jae arrived at this time, and Yang Suk knew that these two people had betrayed him. But the president had his own way of thinking. He did not directly depose the prime minister because that would cause great upheaval throughout the country. He chose to forgive Yang Suk, which also meant that Perrin and Jae were cruelly abandoned. Yang Suk would definitely eliminate the two of them. The president agreed to hand over the two of them to Yang Suk to handle. He only looked at his subordinates to indicate to eliminate the two of them, then left. Suddenly, the car stopped. Everyone was extremely confused, and the driver was the man in black. Because the plan failed, Yang Suk-woo and Perrin's group, along with the North Koreans, were no longer of any value. When everyone ran to check, the man in black had already left a long time ago, and Yang Suk-woo was no longer breathing. The squad leader had been upset with Yang Suk-woo for a long time and decided to forgive Perrin and Jae. Perrin took Jae and tried to escape, but at this moment, a gunshot rang out. Perrin smiled and told Jae to go first. As Jae reacted, Perrin was heavily injured. Jae looked behind Perrin, and the person who opened fire was the man in black. Because Perrin and Jae knew the contents of the entire plan, he was forced to eliminate them. He slowly moved forward, aiming at the two of them. Perrin held Jae's hand tightly. This scene was like history repeating itself. This was the reason the two of them had been separated before when they jumped into the river. It was unclear how the two of them would survive or die. 2 months later, Dr. Han came to the hospital to sincerely apologize to Director Oh, looking at Suin coming. The gap between them was resolved. For the happiness of his daughter, the conflict between Director Oh and Dr. Han was also resolved. The next day, Dr. Han drove Suin into a small town. There, she saw the person she used to like. Suin complained about why he didn't contact her. She thought he was dead. Because Jae's identity belonged to North Korea, Dr. Han asked someone to bring her back. Today was also the day she returned to her country. A car slowly stopped, and the person who got out of the car was none other than Jae. Perrin and Jae hugged each other tightly, and Suin also held Dr. Han's hand. The movie ends here. If you found it good, please give us a like so we can be motivated to make better videos. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.